back to Equilibrium Echoes. I am your host, Alyssa Decker, and today I am bringing a very special guest to the podcast, Sarah Williamson. Sarah has an amazing website called Drink Less, Live Better at drinklesslivebetter.com. She is a life coach, and we're going to dive in today to what she does. I think it's really fascinating, and we're really going to focus on the idea of how your mindset, how your inner world, your inner conversations can affect so much in your life. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into what it is that you do today.
It's so good to be here today. I am 46 years old. I live just outside London in the UK, and I worked for more than 12 years in youth justice, working with young people, talking to them pretty much all day long about their substance use and misuse. I left that job just about 2 years ago now, and knew that I wanted to do something for myself. And the thing that I do now is very much related to my own personal journey, my one that is, guess what, around choosing to drink less, to now be alcohol free, to be sober. I always think there's so much different language, there's so much nuance, the words we can use, finding the words that feel really comfortable and like they most belong to us has been a really big part of my journey, my learning over the last 5 years or so. So what I do now could not be more different than I could have imagined 5 years ago if you'd have said to me, hey, guess what? Not only do you not drink, but also you talk to other people about this amazing lifestyle. No one would have been more surprised than me.
Yes. Okay. So, and I think that's so true because I think a lot of us can relate to that. Like, where we are now is not where we thought we would be. I mean, that's very much true for me. If you'd asked me 2 years ago where I thought I would be, it would not be, my answer would not be where I am today. So let's start with the name of your business. Yeah. Drink Less, Live Better.
Yeah.
Why does drinking less help us live better? Like so many of us, I mean, we have this idealized sort of image of, you know, sipping a glass of wine and champagne at special events and a pina colada on the beach, right? We tend to sort of idealize this this idea of how alcohol marks special moments in our lives. And so it seems sort of counterintuitive sometimes to think about taking that away and living better. So how did you get to that point, and what is your philosophy on that?
I think there's a couple of different strands of thoughts I've got around this stuff. So one of them is the idea that as a society, we do exactly as you just said. You know, we celebrate the good times, the weddings, the holidays, the high days with a drink. And we also, when things have gone terribly wrong and there are funerals and big disappointments in life, we also have a drink. And at some point in the past, I recognised this cognitive dissonance. I thought to myself, hang on a second, there's this thing that we are saying, this cures everything, or this fixes everything, or this brings something to every occasion. And I wondered how that could be true, because if we were experiencing some really high emotions, things like joy and gratitude and hanging out with the people that we love most, that energy is a really good place to be. And if we are feeling really low and upset and desperately depressed and anxious and unhappy, how can the same, I'm just going to use this word as a joke for a moment, but medicine fix both of those things? And suddenly it felt like there was something that I'd been sold that wasn't quite right. And in that, I started to recognise the different ways in which alcohol is marketed to us. How, as a society, perhaps we keep each other a little bit stuck by not telling the truth about alcohol. Perhaps we say things like, oh, that's a devastating piece of news you've just had, let's have a drink to get over it. Because actually, maybe that is easier than saying to somebody, I really want to hear about your pain. If you want to talk about it, I'm here to listen to you. This thing that we use perhaps as a band-aid, as a sticking plaster, just because it's quicker, it's easier to numb out, to hide away from, to deny the stuff that's really going on. So I would say to you, it was a gentle unraveling over time that these thoughts were occurring to me. It wasn't a one day thinking, hang on a second, have I been misled? Have I been lied to? And I think the more I started to recognise that things like nights out with my girlfriends, where we were perhaps in a nice restaurant, eating a lovely dinner, catching up with our stories, the ambience in the place was nice, the waiters were good fun, whatever it was, I started to realise that actually the really good things were all of those things about the situation. That was what was in my glass actually didn't make a lot of difference. And what helps me to relax in life is being around nice people, is hanging out, doing the things I want to do. The act of sitting on the sofa or the couch on a Friday evening, that act in itself is relaxing, if that's what you enjoy doing. And actually the idea of me drinking wine at that point, I had, I suppose, practiced and led myself to believe that it was the wine that was the relaxing part about that activity, when really it actually wasn't. It was the sitting down and resting that was relaxing. So yeah, it's been unpicking different bits at different points along the way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think that we do that sometimes? We have those narratives in our head, first of all, because I think that's what we're fed with a lot of social media and entertainment, movies, things like that. But also, it struck me when you were talking that I think sometimes we don't really know what is really relaxing to us, or we're not even stopping to think, what is it about this scenario or this situation that I'm really enjoying? We just assume, that the alcohol contributed to our enjoyment. We're not even thinking, well, it's the friends and the conversation that I'm really enjoying, right? So do you think that a lot of it is really, we get into these traps or these cycles or whatever you want to call it, where we're not stopping to actually think about what is happening in our lives? We're just jumping from one thing to the next and not really thinking about what's good for me in this and what's not.
Absolutely. When you mentioned that, I had a thought that flashed through my head about the picture when we're on vacation with the margarita or the pina colada or whatever in front of the sunset, whether that's a selfie or not, or whether it's just the glass, on the edge of the beach hut with the beautiful horizon behind it. That photograph would just be beautiful without the drink in it. That moment in time feels perhaps awe-inspiring, feels like nature is wide and big and we are a small part of the universe. It makes no difference what is in that glass. And in fact, that photo might be nicer without that glass in the forefront of it anyway.
Right.
I think for a start, it's really quite difficult often to walk away from what the herd or the pack behaviour is. If your family, if your friendship group have always socialised in this way, you really might feel like you risk being outcast or, being questioned about changing your habits. When we have something like, okay, I'm just going to, run a little experiment now and see how it feels if I start drinking less than I was before, or I'm sober curious, I'm going to have a period of not drinking just to see how that works out for me, physically, emotionally, spiritually, perhaps. When you say something like that, you perhaps expose yourself to being questioned further about it. Well, why do you think you need to drink less, Sarah? You don't drink any more than the rest of us. You're then asked for your justification for your decision. But what? You haven't lost your job. You haven't crashed your car. You haven't blown your relationship up. There's nothing wrong. Why do you need to stop? Why do you need to change? And actually, that's hard work. You know, sometimes you need to have all of that stuff lined up for yourself first before you can confidently say it out loud. And I'd also say, on the flip side of that, in brutal honesty, we don't owe anybody else any kind of explanation for our behaviours.
That's a good point. But I know that in my own life, like, there have been times when I've made a decision and I've acted on it and I've waited for it to play out before I told anyone about it, because I wasn't ready to explain or defend my position. And once I had the evidence that, oh, this is working for me, then it was much easier to have that conversation because I felt confident in my decision. So I want to back up just a little bit and have you tell us a little bit more about your personal journey with alcohol. What was it that kind of changed things for you, and how did that change play out in your life?
I would say I had a fairly UK standard-ish growing up relationship around alcohol. I grew up in a tiny village. I drank in the village pub from probably about when I was 16-ish or so. The licensing laws, well, they were the same as they are now, but they weren't necessarily adhered to in the same way then as they are now. Grew up very much with, I suppose, my teenage drinking being a weekend thing and a party thing. Went to university and very much did the drinking through university, you know, fun student lifestyle type of drinking. I definitely got myself in sticky situations, well, you know, put myself in very, very vulnerable places, but at the time, I think, always brushed it off as part of, you know, being young and having fun. I worked in London after I graduated, where the mantra was very much work hard, play hard, and play hard was a euphemism for get very wrecked very often. And, you know, there would be nights where I didn't actually have time to get the tube home to be back in work for the right time the following morning. So I might have slept in the first aid room at work for a couple of hours before cracking on with my job the next day. And it just felt like part of that culture at that time. I met my husband when I was 25. We got married quite quickly, and I suppose my drinking then was kind of a couple drinking. I do remember him saying to me on a weeknight at some point, probably quite early on into our relationship, did you know that when you walk in from work, the first thing you do is head to the fridge and pour a glass of white wine before you've taken your coat off? And
Wow.
I was like, oh, yes, thank you. I had not noticed that I hadn't even taken my coat off yet. And probably at that stage, I was drinking 2 glasses of wine an evening. Like, I would not have said that I was doing anything that might have looked catastrophic, but it was very definitely a hard, ingrained habit. So I probably changed a little bit at that point. Perhaps I think I probably stopped drinking during the week at that point. I then had my 2 boys in my late 20s and definitely did long stretches with no alcohol at all when I was pregnant and when I was breastfeeding. And then when the kids were tiny, I'd made a new friendship group, other people who were new mums as well. And our drinking then as a friendship group, what we used to do on a Friday night was all join round each other's houses at about 3-4 o'clock, give the kids their dinner early on, and then get stuck into some Prosecco. And, our husbands would probably get home from work kind of 7 o'clock-ish or whatever. They'd come round, pick up the kids or the mums or whoever was going home. But we used to drink really hard in a very short space of time. And I think a big part of that was around, I now look back and recognise I was really struggling with that identity shift, with going from, working in a job in London, feeling very relied upon by other adults and responsible for big budgets, big projects, to then being responsible for these tiny humans that I had no idea. No one had ever given me any training in.
Right.
Really hard. So those Friday nights were kind of a big release thing. And we used to, on a Saturday morning, I would wake up with the most horrific hangovers. And I don't know if you've ever experienced, a tiny child and a hangover at 5:30 in the morning.
Possibly not the best combination.
Yes, horrific. And I look back and I think to myself, what a disservice I did for myself and my kids, because I had this definite internal conflict that sort of came to me, I suppose, in flashes over time, where I recognised I was living this life where essentially I had everything I ever dreamed of. Was married to somebody who was the greatest man on the planet. I had these 2 gorgeous children. We live in a nice house in a nice town. We've got a dog. What, wasn't this my dream list? So why was I drinking to cope with all of the things that I said I wanted? It felt really confusing and discombobulating. I could not understand my behaviour, but I also could not bring myself too close to the question, because I did not. I suppose to a certain extent I was not ready to unpick it. I just cracked on like that for probably a couple of years. My kids were then bigger and they were in school. In 2017, I had a particular hangover, and that was the one on that day. And I have kept, funnily enough, the train ticket from that day. It was the 17th of June 2017. I'd gone up to London to meet some friends for cocktails and dinner and drinks. We'd gone out for a lovely evening. I came back. The next morning I had the most horrific hangover, and I thought to myself, I'm just not going to carry on like this. Something needs to be different. And in that moment, something different changed in my mind. I saw that if I kept on doing what I'd always done, I was going to get, guess what I'd always got. And although that thought is I really remember that thought on that day, it did actually take me another 2.5 years to do something different. And in that 2.5 years, I built up to the date that I got to in 2019, where I decided I was going to run an alcohol-free experiment for a year. That 2.5 years was the time that it really took me to answer some of those difficult questions, to discover that there was a genre of book called Quitlit, where people write about their experiences, either memoirs or sciencey type books, that there were podcasts, that there were communities of people having these kinds of conversations. I suppose up until that point, I had thought to myself that the only reason you perhaps stopped drinking might have been because you were pregnant, you were on antibiotics, you were driving, or that you had some kind of situation going on whereby you were going to end up in residential rehab, or you were going to be directed to an AA meeting, or there was going to be some kind of intervention because of your enormous rock bottom. And it took me during that time period the the idea of recognizing there didn't need to be a rock bottom. It didn't need to be any worse than that horrific hangover. And actually, the power was in my hands. There never needed to be any kind of intervention. The choice was mine to make. And so I guess I was educating myself. I was reframing situations. I was wondering about, what I was going to do when it was somebody's wedding, or what I was going to do in that holiday situation or whatever. And all of that wonderful unpicking then gave me the opportunity in 2019 to go, okay, I'm ready now. I'm going to stop drinking for a year and see what happens. See if the world ends or if I'm okay.
Yeah, that's really, you said some really, really important things there. A few of them that jumped out at me. You said that you had the thought, right? You had the realization, and then it still took you, another 2 years to be ready to actually make the change. And I think that really emphasizes like the point of this whole podcast, which is everything comes from what happens inside of us, in our heads. All of our actions come from thoughts that we have. And I think where so many of us run into difficulty, and this is very much true for me. I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody here. We have this, we have these mental blocks where we don't want to go there with ourselves. We're afraid maybe of what will happen if we really start to unravel. And like you said, pick at what's really going on. If we start asking ourselves the hard questions and actually answering them, because I think we know on some level, if we do that, it's going to require uncomfortable feelings. It's going to require uncomfortable change. And it's so much easier to just maintain the status quo, right? And the other thing that you said that really jumped out at me was you realized that there didn't need to be a rock bottom. And I think, I know for myself, I've used that so many times to justify staying in situations or holding on to behaviors that are not serving me well, because it's not that bad yet, right? It's not as bad as someone else. It's not bad enough to force me to make a decision. And what you're saying is you were able to get to a place where you recognized there was a better way and choose that without waiting for a catastrophe to force you to make a change. So what did that internal dialogue look like in your head when because I'm sure there was probably, like you were saying, part of you that was just like, this isn't that bad. This is fine. It's serving me well in some respects. And the other part of you is like, but there's a better way. So what did that internal conversation look like for you? And how did you sort of puzzle that out in your own experience?
So the line that felt most useful to me was, I suppose, essentially me answering myself. When I had that thought of, but it's not that bad, but you're not that bad really, other people are worse, what I tagged on to the end of that, each time that kind of thought occurred to me, was, but is it good enough? And so it's not that bad is okay. That's not a terrible place to be. Is it good enough? So what would change then if it was better than not that bad? And in that, it's, it could be better than it is. I was able to recognize, particularly, I think, we're really more easily able to identify the physical things that we might talk about if we were to have a break from alcohol, or to reduce the amount we're drinking. We would be able to say, what, your REM sleep is going to improve really quickly. If you're prone to breakouts, your skin is really likely to clear up really quite quickly. That low level brain fog that you have, maybe it's perimenopause, maybe it's alcohol. That anxiety that you're feeling, is that related to alcohol? Because, a conversation we're not very often prepared to have is the one about the fact that alcohol is a depressant. And these physical, I suppose, improvements felt like they came quicker to me. I maybe didn't recognise the emotional benefits quite so soon. It was a while into my break from alcohol that I recognised that I was becoming a much more patient parent, that I was much more tolerant about, plans changing, different people needing different things from me, and being okay about it, feeling less generally harassed as a parent. And also the spiritual stuff, the personal growth that comes when you give yourself the time to actually consider what you'd like to be different. There is a huge gift there. I mean, it's all very well for you and I to say, okay, I drink a couple of glasses of wine on a Friday night, and maybe I'm drinking that wine from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. So what? That takes 3 hours out of my week, and what I'm doing is I'm being convivial with my husband, or I'm, chatting to my girlfriends over the kitchen counter or whatever. But you've also spent time thinking about buying that wine, making sure you've got the right wine in, the time you spend thinking about putting it in the fridge so it's chilled to the right temperature, drinking it, and then that feeling below par the next morning, even if you're not hungover, but you are just feeling like a little bit under the weather. If you're not getting the best of yourself on a Saturday morning, or giving the best of yourself to your kids or the people around you, and I think I was able to pull that stuff apart quite nicely in that time period when I was going from recognising the hangover from hell to deciding to give it a stop for a while. What I did in that time was significantly cut down my drinking. So the point at which I was binge drinking, let's say those situations on a Friday night with my girlfriend, I might have been drinking, a couple of cocktails, a couple of glasses of wine, a couple of glasses of fizz, or a gin and tonic, or whatever. By the time I decided I was going to stop for a while, I was only ever drinking 1 or 2 glasses of wine on a night out, and only ever drinking out 1 gin and tonic if I was out for dinner with my husband, for example. So I was drinking what you would say was a nothing to see here amount of alcohol. She hasn't got a problem, that's under the government guidelines for safe drinking. Why does she need to stop? And the answer to that is because it still wasn't good enough. I had recognised that cutting down had brought so many benefits. What if I was just brave enough to take that last step and cut it out? I think the idea of giving yourself that experimental mindset and saying, okay, let's see what happens. There are no rules here. Nobody was saying to me, you've got to do this for any particular reason. It was done out of a freedom of choice that felt really good by then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes we don't have very high expectations, not expectations, but very high standards for ourselves. We're willing to accept a lot less for ourselves than maybe what we deserve, because we don't think we deserve it, or because we don't even stop to think about it so many times. So tell me, if I was your client, I was coming to you because I was doing a lot of social drinking, and I really wanted to explore this idea that maybe this isn't really serving me well for all of the reasons you just mentioned. What are some things that you would say to me in that initial conversation where we could kind of start digging into my whole question of, is this serving me well? And do I need to do something about this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We very often have starting points, different starting points. Certainly some of the common themes in early sessions together are around thinking about what might look like either a good goal or intention or something to work towards. So some people come in and really like the idea on working on themselves as, a project. here I am with this thing that I think is not working out all right for me. What will the pieces of the jigsaw look like if I start putting them together in a different way? So in talking about what a future intention might look like, we might talk about drinking less, cutting down significantly. We might talk about actually having a period of sobriety. And actually, that's something that I do always say to clients, why don't we have that quite near the beginning of our piece of work together? Because actually, a really good starting point to evaluating your relationship with alcohol is actually giving it that good clear break, let's say for a month in the first place. Let's notice what, keep a record. What does your sleep look like? How are you going to deal with those uncomfortable situations? So we end up talking a lot about feelings. We end up talking a lot about coping mechanisms. We spend a bit of time talking about distractions, and distractions are useful. If you've got a particular 6 p.m. gin and tonic habit, what are you going to do at 6 p.m. instead? And it's all very well saying, here's a list of things I've thought about. Maybe at 6 p.m. I'm going to meditate for half an hour. Well, that's no good if you've got 3 children who actually want feeding. Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
And what are you going to do? I had this great idea about I'm going to have a bath at 6 p.m. Well, fabulous, but let's get to what's behind that 6 p.m. feeling in the first place. Is it because you're actually really, really hungry and you haven't had a snack since lunchtime? So, if we reversed the layout of your day, would it have been better to have planned in a really decent snack at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m? Have you actually drunk any water today? Let's look at the practical stuff. Very often we turn to chug a glass of wine or whatever the thing is, in part because we're really quite thirsty, and it's going to hit your bloodstream quick, and it's going to give you that massive sugar spike, which perhaps you hadn't recognised. What you really need at that time of day is a bit of energy. I think the feelings thing is really important. One of the examples I would give for myself is I had lost sight of the fact that a part of what was happening for me at the time I was deciding to cut down my drinking was around some of the disconnect that I'd had in one of my friendship groups and some loneliness and isolation I was feeling around that. So if you'd have said to me at that time, well, I can see you would like a drink at 6 p.m, why don't you just hop in the bath to distract yourself? Whilst it might have served as a distraction in that moment, I was still going to get out of the bath and still feel lonely, but then I just would have been wet as well as lonely. It wouldn't have done anything about addressing the situation. So I have very careful conversations with my clients about what's the thing behind the thing. Very often we will say something, but we don't necessarily, we might not have thought any deeper about it up until that point. One of the things that my clients so often say to me at the beginning, we'll be talking about why this experiment, this idea, this project might feel like a good time right now. And people say this kind of thing in response to me, which is exactly what I said when I first set out. I'm going to do this because I want my kids to get the best from me. I want to have a better relationship with my husband. I want to think about the choices that I'm making around my nutrition. I want to feel physically like I'm actually getting something out of my workouts, like it's worth doing yoga without a hangover, that if I'm going to drink a green smoothie, it might be just as well not to have the toxin in the evening. All of these reasons why are great reasons why, don't get me wrong on that. But after you've gone a little while down the road, one of the things that is so important, the reason why this is such a good idea is because you really care about you, and you are important to yourself. And that was so impossible for me to claim right at the beginning when I was first thinking, I was going to take alcohol out of my life because I thought I was going to be lonely, miserable, boring. No one was going to want to hang out with me anymore if I wasn't living up to my, my old version of myself. What a gift it is to be able to say at some point down the line, do you know what? I did that for me because I now know that I am so worth being in those uncomfortable situations for, because it is so much better just for me.
Yes. We forget sometimes that we are the only constant in our lives. Like, we are stuck with us for 70 or 80 or 100 years, however long we're blessed to live. We're stuck with ourselves. And if we are not working on ourselves, if we're not creating that peace and joy inside of ourselves, then we're sabotaging ourselves. Right? But I think as society trains us, especially as women, and I think this happens for men as well, but especially women, we are trained very early on that it is selfish to focus on ourselves. It's selfish to think about ourselves, right? And there's this whole movement of self-care right now, but I feel like it doesn't go deep enough. It's all about, taking that bath or reading the book. But there's really a lack of education for women in particular about what it looks like to care for yourself inside your mind, to care for your emotions, to care for your heart, to have your own back. Because we're just taught we take care of the people around us, right? That's what we do. We're women. We take care of our husbands. We take care of our children. We show up at work and take care of everyone else. And so I think that's such an important piece of what you're saying is like, the real motivation needs to be, I'm doing this for me because it's going to be better for me in the long run. I'm doing it to care for myself. I think that is, I know myself listening to that 2, 3, 5 years ago, there would have been some kind of internal resistance to that because I was so conditioned to be focused always on everyone else. And so do you find that with your clients and in these conversations, there's this theme of like, how do you move past those surface layers of I'm doing this to have a better relationship with my husband, I'm doing this to be a better parent, and how do you practically get from that high level, this is why I'm doing it, to that deeper level of this is why it matters to me? Like, are there some really practical mindset shifts there that you walk clients through that take them deeper?
Yeah. I use various different coaching tools and modalities. I actually think one of the more I reflect on this, the more I think it's true. One of the most important things is really about listening very, very carefully to what somebody is telling me. And if I were to take an example, like the idea that somebody might be drinking because, superficially it looks like habit, it looks like stress relief or whatever. What we might get to at some point along the line is actually that either they're deeply, deeply unhappy in their job, or actually their relationship hasn't been working out for them for a long time. And so there might be something under, it looks like the presenting situation might be, I'm coming to talk to you about alcohol, but in a not very far down the road, it turns out really alcohol was something that was just a bit of a mask, over something else that felt bigger, that felt deeper, that felt way too unwieldy to ever unpack previously, and now it's bubbling to the surface. Certainly we do a lot of work around the feelings is a big part of it. We do look at other areas of somebody's life as we're talking about what's going on. We look at, as well as having future goals, we do talk about what has brought somebody to the place where they are, which bits are habit, which bits are learned, which bits are around how my family has always done things. I think a really important part of it is all around safety and security and stability. So can somebody come into my place, and at what point will they feel really willing and able and comfortable to say the hard and difficult things that you never ever could have said out loud before, finding that there is this place where somebody will be deeply empathetic, somebody who has walked along not the same but a similar path to you, is not a million miles away from you. I'm not here claiming to you that I've been sober for 30 years and I did it in my late teens kind of thing. This feels like my lived experience is absolutely as important as all of my professional training in this field. I think that opportunity for somebody to say out loud, this is my truth, can you hear it? And to know that you are never going to be denied your truth, and let's explore the interesting questions that come up around that. So I would say to you, it's a mixture of different tools, different modalities, and truth-telling, storytelling, laying all of the cards out on the table.
Yeah, it really is a deep exploration of self and thoughts and the experiences that have brought us to where we are. So leave us with a parting thought here. What would you like to say to someone listening who is intrigued by this conversation? And what would be your parting wisdom for us?
Yeah, I think my parting wisdom would be, if I were to think about, myself being in a situation where I might have really appreciated years ago hearing somebody say something like this out loud, I recognise that in that place, one of the sets of feelings I'd have most have been struggling around would have been guilt and shame. And so I suppose my parting gift right now would be around, any of those feelings that you are experiencing that are potentially holding you back from making a change, doing something different right now. Those feelings are entirely valid, and how about, starting off really gently down that road of where can you go now, having recognised that there are some incredible resources out there. I think, and I'm bound to say this anyway, but I think that we are right at the bottom of a wave that is going to rise up in the next 20 years. I think that we will look back in 20 years and wonder what we were doing as a society at this time, drinking as much as we ever were. I know I'm talking about, a big dream here, but we are going to recognise more about the health implications and how we can take our own well-being into our own hands, and looking for the support, the care, the love you need around that is such a massive gift for yourself right now.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you listening, you can find Sarah at drinklesslivebetter.com. You can reach out to her there to learn more about how to work with her, to see what other content she has available on her website. And I know that, Sarah, you have a free gift for our listeners, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yep, sure. If you head to my website at Drink Less, Live Better, there's the 5-day experiment that you can download. That's a 5-day email program that'll land in your inbox and give you some amazing tools, resources, insights, suggestions to help you start off with some curiosity down this road.
Excellent. All right. Go check that out, drinklesslivebetter.com, and get in touch with Sarah. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. It was a pleasure.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening. We will see you in the next episode.